Hi there. The new American Institute in Taiwan has been opened by US and Taiwanese officials and was attended by the Assistant Secretary of State for Culture and Education, Royce, the highest US official to visit Taiwan to date. Does Ms. Royce's visit to Taiwan mark the opening of a de facto US embassy in Taiwan? How can we interpret the symbolism and links the AIT establishes? And how can Beijing deal with this in a constructive and sustainable manner? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Zhong Ho Tao, who is a research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Mr. Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar with Tsinghua University. We shall also be joined via satellite from Taipei by Professor Zheng Youping of Taipei University. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Gentlemen, a very simple question. Do you think this AIT represents the de facto American embassy in Taiwan?
Short answer is yes. It does just about everything that an embassy does other than government-to-government relations. You can get visas. It will deal with cultural exchanges. If Americans get into legal trouble or have health emergencies, they contact us. And the security, other than not having Marine guards, is pretty close to what an American embassy would have.
But actually, it is not an embassy de jure, but just in the fact, because actually it is only a non-profit organization according to the so-called Taiwan Relations Act. The ART is not a governmental office, it is just a non-profit organization. Apart from that, those staff, those people who are working in the ART are not directly from the Department of State. They are just retired diplomats, so they are not directly employed by the Department of State. So from this, we could say that the RT is just not an embassy de jure, but maybe to some extent, at least to some extent, for some functions, it is similar to the embassy.
But what do you make of the presence of Royce, Assistant Secretary of State for Culture and Education? Her husband is said to be a very powerful lawmaker who authorized, in fact, who authored perhaps the Taiwan Travel Act. What do you think of the implications?
It shows that the United States is indeed highlighting the Taiwan's role in the United States-India-Pacific strategy, just because some partners of the United States, for example, the India is taking a swing attitude towards this strategy. That makes the United States believe that India is not so reliable, it's not so dependable. So the United States just want or wish Taiwan could play a much more important role to engage or to contain Chinese mainland. So they send the Assistant Secretary of State to Taiwan to show that United States is indeed attach great importance on Taiwan.
Although this is one where there's disagreement in American media. The New York Times treated this as a sign of disrespect to Taiwan, that a low-level functionary was sent. When you had State Department, you had the Secretary of State, the President, almost the entire White House staff was nearby in Singapore, and they decided to do this the same day as the summit in Singapore with Kim Jong-un. But at the same time, the CNN coverage was that this was a slap at China. So there's a division in the American media on this.
Let me go to Professor Zheng Youping from Taipei University. Hello. Professor Zheng, what do you think of the coincidence between the summit in Singapore and the opening of your AIT?
Well, it is a pure coincidence. It was never intentional. But we have to say that the fact that Royce coming to Taiwan does represent a certain political gesture on the part of the United States. The American administration obviously wants to send a very friendly message to the Tsai Ing-wen administration, but at the same time, it does not want to antagonize Beijing. Therefore, it is sort of a compromise. Obviously, everybody knows that Royce is only in charge of the educational and cultural affairs. In other words, she is not that sensitive. she is not as political as the other officials might represent. But on the other hand, it is still a symbol of America's commitment to the Tsai Ing-wen administration and Taiwan. Therefore, we have to say that Americans are playing a very smart Taiwan card. On the one hand, it encourages Taiwanese administration, especially those pro-independence political force, that the United States is firmly standing behind them, while the United States is also showing that it's good faith to Beijing that it does not intend to go too far beyond the red line, or even the United States is carefully standing behind the red line.
In theory, Ho Tao, with the approval of the Taiwan Travel Act,
Yes.
in theory, the level of official exchanges between Taipei and Washington could go higher and could be escalated. But what do you think of the alleged low-profile and self-deprecating delegation that was sent to Taipei by the State Department? Do you think this symbolizes the caution, the strategic patience, or just a matter of skills?
I think it represents a kind of a caution, just as you said, because as for United States, it needs some cooperation from Chinese mainland, especially for the North Korea nuclear issue. Without the Chinese mainland's wishful cooperation, I don't think Donald Trump will make a great success. So the United States is very cautious on Taiwan issue. That's the reason why the United States did not send a very high-level official to Taiwan, for example, the minister level. But that is totally beyond the Tsai Ing-wen's expectation. In the before, Tsai Ing-wen expected or wishing that the United States could send a minister level, for example, the minister in charge of education, the minister in charge of culture, or even health could visit Taiwan. But Tsai Ing-wen finally failed to.
Well, Rick, it's true that President Trump may expect China to reach out and help the White House in the process of denuclearization. However, what do you think of this allegation that Beijing threatens to oust the American ambassador to Beijing should the White House send a pretty senior official to attend the opening of the EIT?
Well, I think that there may have been an implied threat, but I don't think that Beijing would do that. I mean, I think this is one where the U.S. government decided it wasn't worth antagonizing rather than responding to a potential threat. And I mean, expelling the ambassador would be pretty extreme. I mean, sending a clear message would be different.
Cross-strait relations have been deteriorating steadily ever since the inauguration or Tsai Ing-wen taking office, because he refuses to accept the One China principle, and TMT has been left marginalized basically in Taiwanese political ecosystem. Therefore, this is a delicate moment for the cross-strait relations, and within 1 month, 2 small countries have switched their diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. And therefore, should a senior government official from Washington be sent to Taipei, and Tsai Ing-wen, should Tsai Ing-wen give a red carpet ceremony to welcome this high-profile delegation? And then, what do you think of revenge and further retaliations for Beijing, and do you think that's what DPP really wants? Well,
again, the motives of the leaders on Taiwan is a different question than the U.S. administration, and I think they want, I mean, the leaders in Taiwan would like to put pressure on the U.S. administration to take a harder line. I just think that whether it was the Obama administration or now the Trump administration, they're weighing the long-standing American ties to Taiwan with the expanding relationship with Beijing, and now, in particular, with the North Korean situation, Xi Jinping and the Chinese government is essential to moving that forward.
Let me go back to Professor Zheng. What do you think of the real reason for the U.S. government not to send a senior government official? We were discussing whether there is such a threat from Beijing that the U.S. ambassador could be driven out of the mainland should the Trump administration go as far as to send a high-level delegation?
Well, I'm not so sure if what Beijing would do in case of such a scenario. But one thing is for sure, I'll bet you that there are dozens and dozens of policy instruments already available and ready in Beijing's policy toolcase. In other words, Beijing has so many leverages against the United States. Here today, we're looking at China and the United States both being the major power players in the world on the global scale. In other words, today's United States can no longer unilaterally do anything it wants. On many fronts, the United States government has to consult the Chinese opinion. In other words, it will not attempt to antagonize Beijing, especially on such a sensitive issue like this one in Taiwan. Taiwan involves the core
Professor
interests
Chen,
of
you
China.
may have underestimated the political
that
will of the hawks.
Every diplomat in the United States understands.
You may have underestimated the political will and the sense of hostility by people like John Bolton, Peter Navarro. These guys want China to be dead the next day, and they want to do whatever they can to provoke and antagonize the mainland so that Taiwan could be a very effective card in their hands.
But if you look back, John Bolton even wrote an article on Wall Street Journal that he would like to recognize Taiwan diplomatically. However, once you sit in the White House, then you will realize this is not something you can do whatever you want, as you wish. I would say that they are very much constrained by the global power game. And this is something that is not somebody or some group of people can manipulate easily.
Right. What do you think of the hostile and hawkish position of people like John Bolton regarding Taiwan? Professor Zheng said he wrote an article for Wall Street and went as far as to suggest that he would adopt a diplomatic recognition. I mean, this is mad. What do you think would be the most viable option for the mainland?
Well, I mean, to Bolton, it's not mad, it's rational. But in terms of geopolitics, it would not be rational. I mean, it's not going to happen. Bolton may advise Donald Trump to take those steps. But unless there would be a severe deterioration of China-U.S. relations, I don't think the U.S. would play the Taiwan card. However, I think that you're going to see China has three sets of options. One is military and symbolic military. The second would be economic, to ratchet up economic pressure on Taiwan or on the U.S. to change positions. And the third is diplomatic, to isolate the United States if the United States would move aggressively toward a recognition of Taiwan or Taiwanese independence attempts.
And Houtao, do you agree that we have these instruments in our box? We could produce them one by one and give both Washington and Taiwan a hard time, because the issue of Taiwan remains non-negotiable as the bottom line, as the red line between the United States and China. Is that the reason that justifies the extremely tough position of Beijing?
Yes, I think the Taiwan issue is not a negotiable issue for the China and the U.S. relationship, because it is our bottom line, it is our red line. If the United States trespass across this red line, I think the Chinese mainland will take very strong measures against the United States. And even before, we even, just as you said, maybe those U.S. ambassadors would be driven away or out from the Chinese mainland. I think we will also call back our ambassador to the United States. So I think the United States would realize the importance and the sensitivity of the Taiwan issue, and should keep self-restraint on Taiwan issue. And actually, that is the reason why the Joe Bolton or Mark Pompeo changed their policy or changed their attitudes toward Taiwan issue. Before, they may be seems quite radical, irrational, just as Professor said. But once they serve as a very important position in the government, I think they will change their attitude.
However, since the inauguration of the presidency of Donald Trump, we got a strong feeling, and we are convinced that after a few years of a reassessment about the traditional policy of the engagement with the PRC, both Democrats and Republicans, as the release of the recent policy documents suggests clearly that the threat of China is alleged to be even more serious than that from ISIL. For the first time, the alleged threat from China is described as more menacing, more destructive than the issue of terrorism. I mean, this has really shocked most of the Chinese. Do you think, in general, in long term, Taiwan will be a most dangerous flashpoint between the two sides?
Well, first, I think that's the theoretical Trump worldview. I don't think that's the practical American policy. I do think Taiwan could be a flashpoint. I mean, if there's some point where there's military action there, I think that could be a major issue that would rupture relations between the two nations. I think that both nations are trying to do everything they can to go close to the imaginary line without crossing it. And I do think there's been this policy of strategic ambiguity that started in 1972 with Henry Kissinger and continued in 1979 when the U.S. set up formal diplomatic relations with China and ended with Taiwan. I think that this is one where the U.S. wants to continue to be friendly with Taiwan, but does not want to rupture the relations. And I think that there's going to be tension over this, but I don't see the Trump administration, even with these very hawkish people, wanting to pick a fight with China right now or in the near future over Taiwan.
Among the instruments that the mainland could employ to punish a rebellious and defiant Taiwan, do you think there are two options on her table? One is encouraging the American troops to use Taiping Island in the South China Sea so that the alleged assertiveness of the Chinese Blue Water Navy in South China Sea could be restricted effectively. Second is that, for example, if China wins the diplomatic recognition of yet another small state that currently maintains official ties with Taipei, then Tsai Ing-wen would even go further. What do you think would be the other options on Tsai Ing-wen's table?
I think there are lots of other options. For example, she will restrain those supporters for KMT and the new party to travel to Chinese mainland. For example, Wu Dunyi and Zhong Yongqian, for the heavyweight in KMT, would not come to Chinese mainland to attend some high-level CPC and KMT meeting. And another aspect is that she would restrain those young people, especially young students in Taiwan, to study, to work in Chinese mainland. So I think for Tsai Ing-wen, she would have lots of options, but I don't think she would cut the cross-strait relations, especially the non-official relations. And I think I could tell you a figure, a number, that is in the past 4 months, the people from Taiwan to Chinese mainland increased by about 70,000, and that marks the highest point in these recent 10 years.
Well, let me go to Professor Zhang. Now, the most important thing for Chinese leadership in the mainland is to appeal to the mind and heart of the younger generation in Taiwan. Look at the Sunflower Movement. If we were to lose the support from these young guys, then what's the point of taking Taiwan back? So the issue is, what's the chance for young Taiwanese to have jobs in the mainland market? And do you think that DPP will do whatever they can to minimize the impact of Chinese mainland's olive branch to attract the young people?
I think mainland China has done an excellent job and is doing better and better in terms of preparing a very friendly working environment for Taiwanese young people. Give you an example. This coming summer, beginning in July 1st, I myself have about 95 to 100 students going over to Beijing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and some other cities for summer internships for 2 months. Now, why would these students, why would these younger generation Chinese be so interested? Why would they be so interested in going over to mainland China for 2 months of summer internship? Because most of these young kids, frankly, told me that they think that there is a future for them in mainland China, and they are looking at mainland China as a very friendly environment because of the recently announced preferential policies implemented by all the different provinces. These young people are no longer as radical as they once were during the Sunflower Movement. This is very interesting. It all changed within the last 2 years or so. And if you want to ask me why, I think the answer is very clear. Because Tsai Ing-wen did a lousy job in terms of administering, in terms of her administration's policies. Taiwan's economy is in a slump. Taiwan economy is in a pretty bad shape. And these young people feel that if they can't see any future here in Taiwan, then why not try the other side of the Taiwan Strait, where it's a lot more attractive and it's a lot more dynamic and vibrant.
Here is one more question, Professor Zheng, about the relevance, if any, between Taiwan and Hong Kong. Latest development shows that a student leader who had organized the protest movement in Hong Kong has been sentenced to 7 years imprisonment, and that's pretty severe because he was accused of attacking the law enforcement personnel in the streets of Hong Kong during the days of rioting. And for a while, the DPP in Taiwan said, look at what's happening in Hong Kong. If we yield to the so-called tyranny of mainland authorities, today's Hong Kong will be the future of Taiwan. Now, do you think the young students in Taiwan would still turn to Hong Kong for the inspirations in showing their defiance about the reunification? Because after all, DPP has done a lot over years to get rid of the influence of Chinese ethnicity. So do you think such negative impact would start to take its toll on the younger generation in Taiwan?
Now, if we were talking about this topic 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I would have told you that, wow, it's going to have a very negative impact on the Taiwanese younger students. However, since the last 2 years, I have to say that I myself, am very surprised to find out that these younger generation of Taiwanese students, they feel that today's Hong Kong, it would be tomorrow's Taiwan. This kind of story, this kind of slogan no longer applies to them anymore because they fully realize that Hong Kong is Hong Kong, Taiwan is Taiwan. These are two different stories, two different scenarios. You cannot compare apples to oranges. So today we have to say that Taiwanese students on campus are not that concerned with what is going on in Hong Kong. The sentence you just mentioned is hardly mentioned in my classroom, not even in my, the 2 campuses where I teach. I have to say that today's Taiwanese younger people are becoming more and more pragmatic. For them, they are looking at Hong Kong as Hong Kong itself. Hong Kong is not tomorrow's Taiwan. So it would be difficult for the sentence or the judicial decision in Hong Kong to have such a huge or negative impact on Taiwanese younger college students.
Well, whatever her pro-secession staunch position of Tsai Ing-wen, she got to do whatever she can to make sure the economy would survive the hardships.
Yes.
That said, let me go back to the diplomatic breathing space of Taiwan.
Yes.
One after another, Burkina Faso and Dominican Republic switched their diplomatic recognition. Do you think the next, a third and fourth is likely to follow suit? Under what circumstances do you think the mainland would move further in this direction to let Taiwan feel the rapidly shrinking living space of Taiwan's diplomacy?
That depends on what Taiwan will do in future. If Taiwan continues to refuse the 1992 consensus and even to take some radical measures to move further on her Taiwan independence road, I think the Chinese mainland will be compelled to take some measures. For example, to take the Taiwan's the so-called diplomatic partners. And actually, there are at least 10 Taiwan's diplomatic partners are waiting to normalize their relationship with the Chinese mainland, including Haiti and some lots of other countries. And if the Taiwan authority could fundamentally change her cross-strait policy, I think the Chinese mainland will also become much cautious. But I'm a little bit pessimistic about Taiwan's
You have good reasons to show pessimism, since that radical move in favor of the mainland or the cross relations would go against the fundamental pro-secession spirit of the deep green camp. Having said this, what do you think of the political future of KMT? I mean, do you foresee any chance for this biggest opposition party to make a political comeback in the local elections?
There's always a chance, particularly economics changes everything, as our guest from Taipei was saying. When economics are bad, when people are feeling the pain, they go from one party to another. KMT is in a bad spot right now politically in Taiwan, but there's no reason that it can't change. In democracies, there's an ebb and a flow, and the question is, can they appeal? Can they come up with a political agenda that appeals? They can't really go back to the olden days and talk about make Taiwan great again. They have to come up with a future-oriented
Well, solidarity or unity within the KMT, the pan-blue camp, remains a big issue and a challenge for the future of this big opposition party, the biggest of its kind in the island. But what about the internal struggle within the DPP? Liu Xiulian has defected and left the administration. Who will be the next? Do you think DPP stands a very good chance of winning an absolute overwhelming campaign success in the local elections to lay the groundwork for Taiwan continuing her office?
That's really a good question. Actually, there are, of course, the conflict between different sections within DPP party. Even Chen Shui-bian could not hope fully cooperate with Taiwan and some other sections also. For example, Xin Chaoliu, Xie Xi, and Su Xie, different sections that are struggling for different goals. As for the DPP's this local election, I'm a little bit pessimistic, since I believe that DPP could not continue to become the ruling or party in the local area, and KMT have a good chance to win in this local election. And if KMT could re-win the Taipei and Taichung, I think the so-called presidential election, KMT have a good chance.
Thank you so much. Tsai Ing-wen did deliver a speech at the opening of the AIT in Taipei, in which she said she would never ever give in to the pressure from mainland on the future of Taiwan. Well, does that mean bad future for the island? We'll continue our discussion about cross-strait relations and the relationship between the United States and China regarding Taiwan. Until then, goodbye.